other allies in the area that have radar, satellite imagery, just were like, and there's even somebody on the ground that I think had footage. And you could see like a missile basically hit it and go. And at that point, they couldn't deny it anymore, and so they openly said that, yeah, we shot that plane down. The Iranian people are now pretty ticked off about that, right? So their government lied to them about this, and now there's been a couple of days of riots and protests against the government and asking their leaders to step down. That's been kind of interesting as well to see. So the talk of a cyber attack. Iran is probably when I'm thinking of adversaries to look out for, ones that are probing your network or trying to get a foothold. Iran is one of those countries I think of. Because of our government's stance with Iran and Iran's government stance with ours, there's a lot of tension, and cyberspace is so delicately defined but not really defined. People are constantly probing both sides, right? So what would an adversary, like a nation state, really want to do to a power company? So besides like taking it down, right? Shutting it down and doing destructive malware, right? That's an attack. But in general, if you're a military and you're trying to kind of like build up weapons that you're going to use when you have to use them in a cyber fight, you essentially just want initial access. You want to find out what that company is all about, how do people log into it, are you able to get their credentials? So you'll see like a lot of credential stealing type of activity. I've seen that with Russia before, where we actually had a piece of Russian malware that was using some pretty tricky stuff with SMB that essentially was trying to steal like your actual authentication token that's used in Windows. They were trying to steal it out so they could crack it and then have access to a company. So you see this stuff pretty often, and that's mostly the most common. But today Iran has that capability and more. They've done some destructive stuff, which we'll talk about. And they've used a lot of it, especially in their, to advance their political goals as well. Stuxnet is a pretty cool piece of malware that allegedly the United States and Israel, then they're actually supported to do, and it was giving readouts to the operators like nothing was wrong. So everything was green, and things are flying off and blowing up in the background. For a while, when this started happening, the Iranian government was blaming their scientists. So you can imagine how much of a hit to your program it could be when you're blaming your scientists for actually what's happening as a cyber attack that they didn't know about. Eventually, they did catch on, but we destroyed a large, I forgot how many centrifuges we actually destroyed of Iran's. Yeah, it was a huge amount. So the operation was extremely successful. And so if you want to learn more about that malware strand, it's great. There's so many research papers on this and even samples that you can play with and take apart. There's memory samples you can play with to see how it works and how it does what it is. It's pretty cool. So that happens to Iran, and probably at the same time they're starting to build up some cyber capabilities, but this really probably greenlit them to be like, holy cow, we need to get better at this so that we can prevent it. So you've seen a lot of their abilities basically grow, and they start to use it more and more often. So they invested very heavily in this. So here's a list of just some of the top attributed groups I could kind of like find real quick. There are many more that are out there. Who names these? Depends on the security researchers of the company. If you're familiar with CrowdStrike, they like to use like different animal names like Russian bears. So a lot of different bear names. Kitten is what they use for Iran. So they use different like charming kitten or bouncy kitten. Kind of interesting. But we can look at one of the larger ones like APT-30. I forgot who actually came up with the APT names. Anybody know? Shoot. So it's an espionage group. It was heavily linked with a lot of their intelligence side. But the biggest thing that they're kind of attributed for was Saudi Aramco. How many people know what the company Saudi Aramco is?
Oil company.
Yep. And it's it. Yeah.
A bunch of American Canadians come over and pretty much build their facilities.
Oh yeah. And it's in Saudi Arabia. And it's, so go ahead. Is it FireEye? Okay. So FireEye does the APT naming. Yep. Oh, yes. Advanced persistent threat, if you're not familiar with that term as well. So they have yeah, they have a lot of weight on that price, yes. Part of OPEC, that group that controls oil prices, and they all agree and disagree on how much they're going to raise or how much they're going to raise their production or lower their production. Yeah, so they're in the oil and gas industry. They're huge, and actually their company is probably one of the largest, most profitable in the world, but they've been a government-owned oil company that's never been publicly available until just recently. They actually opened up, mostly in Middle Eastern markets. So you can actually buy shares if you're from certain regions of the company now, which is crazy. But Shamoon was another piece of malware that was attributed to APT33. I think recently oh no, not until the Russian ransomware. Shoot, what's it called? I was going to say that's one of the most destructive until, what's that? WannaCry? Wasn't WannaCry, it was the next one. What's that? Petya, yep. I think it was Petya. And Petya was a ransomware type worm variable that if it got into your network, it basically spread to everything that it possibly can in ransomware. It was used in Ukraine, and Ukraine happened to have a system that was actually shared with a bunch of other companies. So while the target was supposed to be some Ukrainian companies, it actually spread to a bunch of networks into a bunch of different companies. It did trillions of dollars of damage and shut companies down. Anyway, so that's a huge number of destroyed, completely ransomware machines. And then there's APT39, again, giving you an idea of what their capabilities are. So that's probably their most known group. And then you think of the other ones where they're targeting telecom and travel industries to collect personal information that aligns with Iran's national priorities. So again, kind of more your politics, people saying crap about me, I want to take them down, know where they are. And then Charming Kitten, espionage group, focusing on individuals of interest to Iran. Again, kind of targeting individuals. Most victims having been located in Iran, the US, Israel, and the UK. Cleaver, again, targeting larger, where it's military, oil and gas, energy and utilities, transportation, airlines. Pretty much all across the board right there. Magic Hound is another attribution group. Again, targeting energy, government, technology. Energy is really big for them as well. Even though a lot of these were targeted really in the Middle Eastern region, they do reach out and hit United States and other companies and other countries. Muddy Water targeted specifically Middle Eastern nations. And then had some targets in Europe and North America as well. And Middle East and international victims since 2014. Again, just kind of all over the place. A lot of energy, government, financial institutions. So the more that you take a look at some of the groups that people have identified and who they believe have attributed correctly back to Iran, you can kind of get a spread of sometimes what they're targeting. These are high level, so it's kind of hard, but if you read each of these articles, it'll give you a better picture. So when your job is to secure a company and you know that you might be a target of a nation. What is it? It's highlighted. 1 second. There we go. Okay. They got me. That's the. Which one did I open? I thought I opened. No, it opened, but it opened the other link. And when I hovered over it, it had the IronNet link. So it's doing something weird. But I copied and pasted it like a fool. Yeah. But you should be, because you have to be able to communicate your... Someone should have downloaded this PDF prior to this, so it's a little slow. Right. Yep. So this is a report I found. Like this company in particular actually published their research and what they found. But this is kind of very similar to some of the reports that we might see sometimes. Like this is a really nice one, but it'll give you entire introduction of Charming Kitten, who they are, when they started, what this this report's going to target between 2016 2017. Just two distinct groups, Charming Kitten and Rocket Kitten. So you'll have to look those up. It'll talk about who they're targeting. So it'll give you a nice summary. Who they're going after, cases, any other articles you might want to read. But the neat part of this one, this is more background information. So they'll do a nice write-up, great info to start learning about who they are and what they're kind of after. But the nice part is, if I get to it, how long is this thing? That's a huge report. That's why it's so big. So besides going through the report, how they figured things out, I think this one they used a lot of fake LinkedIn profiles, and they built up networks for themselves so that they could basically become friends with people. And then using their LinkedIn friends, they were able to basically monitor people or get their contact information, get their email addresses, and be able to target them more accurately. Much like if you're building a phishing email, right? You need to do your research and find out who they are, what they like, what kind of email can you send to them that's going to have the max effect that they're going to click it or open it. But the best part, besides those stuff, it's a fun report, by the way. So the big thing that reports like this will usually have is you have indication of compromise. So IOCs. How many people are familiar with IOCs? Okay. IOCs are commonly going to be like domains that they found that this group was actively using. So here's a list of them, right? So for this particular campaign, they were able to track back that this Iranian group was using all of these domains. So if you have a proxy or a firewall, you could ingest all of these domains and be like, these are known bad, and just block them right there. So on one piece, it's kind of nice because like, hey, we know what they previously used, so if they try and use it again, it won't work. The reality is like any attacker group is usually today not going to reuse the same things they used in the last campaign, right? So it's kind of like one of those baselines, kind of like antivirus, where it's good to know that you have it, and so if they ever use it again, it's going to be blocked. Another tricky thing with reports like this is depending on the quality of the analysts who put it together. So these look pretty unique overall, but there's some times where people do a spotty job or they just took like a cuckoo dump where they executed some malware and like a sandbox, and it gave you like, oh, these are all the IP addresses that it went out to. And inside of that, it touched Google, or it went to like Hotmail or YouTube, and then you find YouTube in here. And then if you blindly go through and just block all these, you just like, hurt your company. You're like, I can't get to YouTube. That's a problem. But also like how many there are. Yeah. All right. So yeah, here's some Google account support stuff. Like you have to validate to make sure that those are actually, because they could be fake. I don't know. Yeah. All right, so again, this is a ton. So who here wants to like by hand type all these into blog? Nobody, right? Another piece of a lot of Intel threat feeds that you'll get, you'll actually be able to ingest it. An easy way might be a CSV. Other ways, they might be in JSON, which is pretty useful. Or they also might be in that other format that just slipped my mind. That's very common. Why? Nope, it's gone. It's gone. Sorry. Stix Taxi. Thank you. Yeah, I had Stux in my head. I kept thinking Stux. I'm like, it's not that. It's not that. Yeah, and Stix taxi is a format that can be used to basically send that information. You can ingest it, and then you can automatically add those domains or some of these IOCs directly into like your SIM or into your firewall, where you can block them or at least look for them, right? Because another thing you might do is take these domains, put them into your SIM. How many people here are familiar with a SIM or what that is? So your SIM for a security team is going to be your system information and event management. So you can think of it as like a really big server that has a massive database, tons of storage, especially for like a company this size, right? Where you're sending every single firewall log goes to the SIM. Yeah, hopefully. That's a different discussion. AV alerts, right, on your boxes, they all go to the SIM. When people log in, all those Windows event logs, those all go to the SIM. So what you have, or what the power of your SIM is, you're able to keep all of this data, and you can usually keep it for like 6 months to a year. And you can see every single domain that went outbound of your company or inbound. And you can write queries and searches, and you can search for, did anyone ever in my company see this stuff? Go to your SIM, you ingest that into a query, and you'll be able to pull a report and show it to your manager and be like, hey, we didn't find anything, or hey, we're screwed. Maybe. Requires more evidence. Yep, Elastic or Helk. Helk? You're not, hunting. It's a custom Elk stack where they did a lot of beautiful things and make your life easier. So. Yeah. It doesn't really have a correlation engine, which is the problem. So you can do straight searches though, really fast. Again, the other cool thing about SIMs is, again, you have trillions of pieces of data, right? Just tons of data, and you can search it in like seconds. And that's also what Elastic is really good for. If anyone's heard of Elastic or Elk, it's a very speedy database where people are just like throwing data into it, and then you can use their query language to quickly bring up data and do everything else you need to do. So it's cool. But yeah, so just a quick example of, so now we're switching back over to IP addresses that they were able to ping. Another piece, well, this is their hashing the IPs. I don't know what that's all about. They'll also give you file hashes, right? So they'll send you like, this is all the known malware, or the malware that we collected that was executed in their investigation when they wrote this report. So they'll give you the file names, they'll give you behavior on different operating systems. If it was just Windows-based, they'll tell you how it operated in Windows-based, how it executed. So they usually target phishing. And once it executes, it quickly pivots to start using PowerShell. And then using PowerShell, it does X, Y, Z to do persistence on the system. Does it load a driver somewhere special? Does it have a script that launches every time the user logs in? They'll write out a lot of that behavioral stuff in here. So then that stuff gets really helpful because like having file hashes, again, is very similar to just knowing the domains, right? It's good to know that, yep, this stuff's bad, but how easy is it to change a file hash? If you're an attacker or an adversary that actually knows your stuff, you're going to make sure that none of your malware that you're utilizing or any of the tools that you're utilizing are going to have new signatures, new hashes, so that you can't detect it easily. So that's when you switch over to more of the behavioral stuff. So the behavioral stuff gets really fun. So if you are in your job and your boss tells you, hey, you don't know how to PowerPoint, you say yes. But if you're like, okay, so how do we defend against Iran? What could we do to bolster our defenses against a group like Iran? So as I mentioned, there's a lot of those known attribution groups or threat groups that are out there. They have a lot of research. Don't mind if these are LinkedIn things. Christian, my boss, sent me this, and I just stole it from him. But MITRE ATT&CK, how many people are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK? So MITRE is a group that's been around for like a long time, has worked very closely with the government. They've done a lot of kind of engineering, and they've bloomed over into like cybersecurity. ATT&CK is the attack techniques, is it attack techniques or tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. And so what they've done is they've taken all that public data, like all those reports that I was showing you, that you can just look on Google, look for a PDF, and look for Iran and cyber, and you'll get like reports that people have written up. They've done a great job of taking all that research that people have done, and they've been actually able to build out profiles for these guys. So if you're like, okay, so we've got some bad guys, so we wanted to do something about this attacker.
I love how it looks like all of these vectors have their own LinkedIn groups where you can connect with them.
So again, they're going to give you a little bit of a summary, just in general who they are. But the cool part is, so MITRE attack techniques. They've done a lot of work on, especially post-exploitation. So once somebody gets into your network, and they're going to do a particular action. So this tactic, T1060, is for registry run keys and startup folders. So they list out a whole bunch of the locations of the most common registry keys, and then they keep going on other registry keys and different parts of the Windows operating system, and where you could put a script to basically launch a DLL, another script. I've seen this used, probably the most common persistent mechanism at first by a majority of the malware that I've seen. They just dump it into the user's run key. So if you log into your computer, you have your own registry hive in Windows. How many people are familiar with the registry in Windows? Okay. So you'll notice that when you log in, if you can actually go into your registry and you can go into your run, that particular key, current user, software, Microsoft Windows, current version run. And in that run, you can actually define a key so that every time that you log in, it launches Notepad++ because you love Notepad++ and you want to run every time that you log in. Well, it doesn't take admin rights to have you do that, right? Because it's your registry hive. So you can edit all you want. So can malware. So malware will drop in, quickly add themselves to that in case the user reboots. And then, right? So you could take this key. You can take that key, depending on what tools that you have. A lot of, I would say, if you guys familiar with EDR, endpoint detection and response technology. So that's going to be your kind of like your next level of antivirus, right? Well, not really antivirus. That's what allows you to do behavioral detections. So EDR is that next step that really gained defenders a huge amount of ground, because you could actually write rules where you're like, hey, whenever I see this process run, Winword, spawning PowerShell, let me know. Because likely PowerShell doesn't usually get called from Word, which means that there's a macro installed. The macro is probably malware. And so if we see that behavior or that relationship, it's probably bad. So you could write these behavioral rules for detections, which also allows you to see things like, did this process touch the run key, the registry run key? You could write a rule around that if you have EDR installed. So we keep going. Pop, 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 pop. They also have all the other APT groups. So remember, we pivoted from looking at a particular Iran group. They use run keys for part of their persistence in their last campaign or many campaigns that they've used. And there's also a bunch of other groups that have used it. So biggest bang for your buck at your company, if you want to help look out for one very commonly used persistent mechanism that I was talking about, it's probably T1060. But what's nice is, so you go back to this, and you can actually have actions to go after to try and bolster your defenses. And you can go up to each one of those other ones that were on here, right? So some of these are going to overlap, right? So each one of these groups has a MITRE kind of definition written up and their known tactics that they've used. Pretty cool, right? So it gives you actually a place to do something instead of just being like, well, we're going to be screwed because, nation state. So MITRE is really cool and really powerful, and I would highly recommend taking a look at it. A lot of the modern detection tools that you look at today, all of them have this integrated or are trying to get it integrated because of how useful it is. Because one of the hard parts in a security team is how do you know that your team's actually doing anything. Because you could spend all day like just chasing things, but this could be an easy way to be like, hey, we know for certain that we can detect this type of post-exploitation. So if malware did execute and they try to do something next, we know that this is going to be there. So cool stuff. Yeah, and that's all I had for that. Any questions on that stuff? They put everybody to sleep?
So when you deal with an APT, like for example, China, you're more interested in stealing industrial secrets.
Yes.
Even though it's a power company, I mean, you still have cell phone technology. I mean, how do you guys? Is it the same steps for defending against those threats?
Yep. You would do a very similar step. So lucky for us, we don't have a lot of IP. Actually, we have no IP. So we almost never really have many threats that come from China. Russia, on the other hand, right? They've been a lot more aggressive in that space, so we get more intelligence from them. The nice part, and a lot about what our program has been about building up these MITRE attack rules. So at this point, we have pretty much